Tae-shin, is this what you do now?
Wait, Elena, it's not what you think. I can explain.
I'm leaving.
The microphone was already live when Kang Tae-shin stopped breathing. He was seated at the front of the Grand Meridian Hall in Dubai, surrounded by 500 of the world's most powerful business minds. The Global Design Summit was the most prestigious event of its kind, and he had been invited as keynote guest, a man whose name had become synonymous with empire, with legacy, with an iron will that had rebuilt Taesung Group from a family conglomerate into Asia's most formidable brand. People leaned in when he entered rooms. Cameras followed him without instruction. He was, by every measurable standard, a man who had everything. And yet, when the host's voice echoed across the ballroom and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our closing speaker, the founder of Elena Global Designs, a woman whose work has redefined luxury interiors across 3 continents." Kang Tae-shin felt the blood drain from his face so fast that the man beside him actually turned to ask if he was all right. He wasn't, because walking onto that stage, in a deep emerald gown that moved like water, was Elena Williams. The same confident tilt of her chin, the same quiet grace in the way she carried herself, as though the world's applause was appreciated, but not needed. She was 32 when she disappeared. She was 37 now, and somehow even more devastating to look at. She smiled at the audience, adjusted the microphone, and opened her mouth to speak. And then the little boy appeared. He had been sitting in the front row with what appeared to be a personal assistant, and now he bounced to his feet the moment he saw her take the stage, clapping with the uninhibited joy that only a child can produce. The audience laughed warmly. Elena looked down at him, and her whole face transformed, softened into something so private and so full that Tae-shin felt he was witnessing something that was never meant for his eyes. The boy was about 5 years old. He had Elena's mouth, that full, expressive mouth, and her warm brown skin. But the shape of his jaw, the line of his brow, the particular way his eyes tilted slightly at the corners, those belonged to someone else entirely. They belonged to Tae-shin. He gripped the armrest of his chair so hard that his knuckles whitened beneath his skin. 5 years. 5 years of searching, of private investigators and dead ends, of staring at his phone at 2 in the morning, hoping a number he could no longer reach would somehow call him back. 5 years of living inside a wound that never properly closed. And she had been building an empire, and she had been raising his son. He sat through her entire speech without hearing a single word. It had not always been like this. There was a time, not so long ago that it felt like another life, though it did, when Kang Tae-shin was the happiest man in Seoul. He had met Elena Williams at a charity auction in Chicago 7 years ago. She was there representing the interior design firm she'd built from nothing, a small but fiercely respected studio that had recently won a national award. He had noticed her before she noticed him, noticed the way she argued passionately with a curator about the provenance of a painting, completely unintimidated by the man's credentials or his condescension. He had fallen just a little in that exact moment. By the end of the evening, he had her business card and a reason to visit Chicago 3 more times in the following 2 months. They married 18 months later, in a small ceremony in Jeju that his father refused to attend. "She is not Korean," Chairman Kang had said, with the practiced calm of a man who believes his disapproval is a form of love. "She does not understand what it means to carry this family's name." "Then I'll teach her," Tae-shin had replied. And he had believed it, believed in the 2 of them, the way you believe in something you have watched survive every test thrown at it. Elena gave up her Chicago studio. She packed her life into 8 suitcases, learned Korean from textbooks and late-night audio lessons, and arrived in Seoul with her whole heart open. Tai-Shin watched her navigate the sharp edges of his world, the polite smiles that were not quite warm enough, the social gatherings where conversations dipped to whispers when she walked in, the subtle but unmistakable ways Korea's elite society registered its surprise that he had chosen her. And he marveled, every single day, at the dignity she met it all with. She never complained. She adapted. She smiled and studied and worked and tried. But trying over time is exhausting. And Seoul, for all its dazzling beauty, wasn't home. She told him this once, late at night, when the city lights were glittering below their penthouse, and she thought he was almost asleep. "I miss Chicago," she whispered. "I miss knowing where I belong." He had pulled her closer and told her she belonged with him. He had meant it. But meaning something and understanding it are different things, and he was too busy, too preoccupied with Taesung Group's expansion across Southeast Asia to understand that his wife was quietly drowning in loneliness. That was the crack in the wall, and someone was already waiting to push through it. Elena met Yoon Seo-rin at an art exhibition in Itaewon, 3 months after arriving in Seoul. She had gone alone. Tae-Shin had a board dinner she wasn't expected to attend, and she was standing in front of a large, abstract canvas, nursing a glass of sparkling water, when a voice beside her said, in flawless English, "It looks like a breakup, doesn't it? All that red bleeding into gray." Elena had laughed, startled. "I was thinking more like a sunrise, but now I can't unsee the breakup." The woman who had spoken was beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful, deliberately, precisely, as though beauty itself was a discipline she had committed to. She wore a cream-colored blazer, minimal jewelry, and the easy confidence of someone who had never had to fight for a room's attention. Her name, she said, was Seo-rin. She was in the arts sector. She knew everyone in Seoul worth knowing. Within 20 minutes, she knew Elena's story. Within a week, she had Elena's phone number and an invitation to brunch in Gangnam. Within a month, she was the person Elena called first when anything happened, good or bad. And Elena needed that. She needed it more than she understood at the time. Seo-rin seemed to anticipate her loneliness before Elena herself could name it. She arrived with shopping bags on hard days. She remembered that Elena's favorite flower was a white peony and showed up with them without occasion. She learned Elena's mother's birthday and reminded her to call. She said things like, "These women don't deserve you," and "Tae-Shin is lucky and he knows it," and "I'm so glad you came to Seoul, because I cannot imagine my life without you now." "Meeting you made Korea feel like home," Elena told her once, and Seo-rin had smiled with her whole face and squeezed her hand and said, "You have no idea how much that means to me." What Elena could not see, what she had no reason to see, because she was not the kind of person who imagined cruelty operating at that scale, was the history underneath Seo-rin's warmth. Yoon Seo-rin had expected to marry Kang Tai-Shin. Their families had been close for 2 decades. They had grown up in adjacent orbits, attended the same elite circles, been quietly assumed by everyone, including Seo-rin herself, to be a natural pairing. She had not rushed it. She had been patient in the particular way that a person is patient, when they believe the outcome is already decided. And then, Tai-Shin had gone to Chicago on a business trip and come back carrying a woman's business card and a look in his eyes that Seo-rin had never seen directed at her. She had waited. She had watched. She had told herself it was temporary, a distraction, a phase, a deviation from a path that had always been meant to lead back to her. And then she had watched him get married. The patience didn't harden into obsession all at once. It was gradual. But by the time she walked into that Itaewon gallery and stood beside Elena Williams, every gesture had been considered. Every question had a purpose. Every friendship they built was a wall Seo Rin was quietly learning to climb. For 3 years, Seo Rin operated like a surgeon, precise, patient, and invisible. She listened when Elena vented about her marriage. She stored everything. And then, carefully, selectively, she began feeding pieces of it back to Tai Shin in shapes he wouldn't recognize. One evening, after Elena had confided that she felt invisible during Tai Shin's work events, "He forgets I'm there," she'd said, not bitterly, just honestly. Seo Rin called Tai Shin the next day. They were old enough acquaintances that the call wasn't suspicious. "I had coffee with Elena," she said lightly. "I think she's starting to resent the sacrifices she made. She mentioned your career a lot. I just thought you should know, as a friend." Tai Shin didn't confront Elena about it. He just grew quieter around her, more guarded. And Elena, who didn't understand why the temperature in her marriage had dropped slightly, tried harder, which made her seem anxious, which made Tai Shin wonder if Seo Rin was right. Meanwhile, Chairman Kang had not stopped working. He had watched his son's marriage with the focused displeasure of a man who believes he knows better and has the resources to prove it. He reached out to Seo Rin privately, an invitation to tea, a conversation that began diplomatically and ended with an understanding. He would use his connections to quietly undermine Elena's attempts to restart her design career in Seoul. Permits delayed, introductions that didn't materialize, clients who canceled without explanation. Seo Rin would continue doing what she was already doing. Together, they would tighten the walls around Elena until she had nowhere to stand. Anonymous messages began appearing, a text to Tai Shin from a blocked number. "Does your wife know she's only in Seoul because she has nowhere better to go?" A note left at Elena's studio space, suggesting her work was only recognized because of her husband's name. Neither of them mentioned the messages to each other. That was the thing. The manipulation worked precisely because it made them both too embarrassed, too wounded to speak. Silence became the language of their marriage. Arguments replaced conversations. Tai Shin, drowning in pressure from his father and misled by the woman he thought was his wife's best friend, began drinking more at events. Elena, isolated and exhausted, began sleeping earlier, rising later, filling her hours with work to avoid the ache of a home that no longer felt like one. Neither of them knew they were being orchestrated. Valentine's Day arrived the way it always does, announced loudly by the rest of the world, which makes the silence inside a struggling home even more deafening. Elena had been holding a secret for 11 days. She had taken 3 tests, just to be certain. She had sat on the bathroom floor, back against the cold tub, holding those small plastic strips, and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming, terrifying relief of it. They had tried for so long. 2 years of hoping. 1 miscarriage she had grieved almost entirely alone, because Tai Shin had been in Singapore for a deal that couldn't wait. She had not told him about the tests yet. She had wanted to do it right. So she planned. She came home early that day, while Tai Shin was at a corporate Valentine's gala she had declined to attend. She lit candles. She set the table with the white peonies she knew looked like hope. She made his favorite meal from scratch, the galbi she had learned from his grandmother's recipe, the one the old woman had quietly taught her during a rare afternoon of warmth that Elena had held like a treasure. She printed photographs from Jeju, from their first Christmas, from a random Tuesday in Chicago before everything became so heavy, and assembled them into a handmade scrapbook. And at the center of the table, in a small white box tied with a ribbon, she placed the tiniest pair of baby shoes she had been able to find. She sat down to wait. At 9 p.m., her phone rang. It was Seo Rin. "Elena," she said, and her voice carried a warmth so practiced it had become indistinguishable from real. Tae Shin just called me. He apparently planned a surprise for you tonight, and he was too nervous to tell you himself. You know how he is. He's waiting for you at the Han River Hotel, Suite 12. You should go. Hurry." Elena's chest lifted. She stood up, looked at the table she had set, and smiled to herself. He'd planned something. Of course he had. Underneath all the silence and the distance, he still knew her. She grabbed her coat, tucked the small box of baby shoes into her bag. She would tell him tonight, together at the hotel, and took the elevator down. She was still smiling when she inserted the keycard Seo Rin had texted her into the door of Suite 12. The door swung open, and the world Elena had spent 3 years building collapsed in a single image. Tae Shin was there. He was barely conscious, slumped against the headboard, glassy-eyed, a glass still in his loose grip. And Seo Rin was kissing him, one hand on his chest, positioned like a painting she had composed herself. Seo Rin heard the door. She pulled back slowly, not startled, not embarrassed. She turned to look at Elena the way a person looks at the final piece of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Elena didn't scream. She didn't speak. She stood in the doorway and felt the baby shoes slip from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft, terrible sound. Seo Rin looked at the shoes. Then she looked at Elena, and she said, with the cool precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment for 3 years, "You were only borrowing him, Elena." Elena looked at Tae Shin one last time. His eyes were struggling to focus. He said her name, Elena. But it came out slurred and reaching, and it was somehow worse than silence would have been. She turned around. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button and stared at the doors and didn't blink and didn't cry and didn't make a sound all the way down. She went home and stood in the kitchen in front of the table she had decorated and looked at the candles that had burned lower now, at the scrapbook and the peonies, and the food she had cooked with someone else's grandmother's recipe. And she felt a grief so complete, so total, that it had no sharp edges anymore. It was just weight, just silence, just the end. She sat down. She wrote one note. She packed 3 bags. She left before sunrise. The note she left behind said, "You didn't just betray me, Tae Shin. You gave my heart to the one person I trusted to protect it." She left her wedding ring centered on the note like a period at the end of a sentence. She left the signed divorce papers beside it. She left the baby shoes on the kitchen counter where the box had fallen open. She did not leave an address. She did not leave a number. She did not say where she was going because she had decided, somewhere between the elevator and the kitchen, that no one from this life was going to follow her into the next one. Her phone was disconnected by morning. Her social media vanished by afternoon. 300 million won still sat in the joint account that she never touched. Elena Williams was gone. Tae Shin woke up the next morning with a headache that felt architectural. Something enormous had collapsed inside him and left rubble. He remembered fragments, the gala, his father pulling him aside and saying things that cut through the noise, Seo Rin appearing at his elbow with a drink, and then another, a car ride he hadn't fully authorized, a hotel room that hadn't been his idea. He remembered Elena's name in his own mouth. He called home. No answer. He drove there at a speed that alarmed his driver. He walked through every room of the penthouse calling her name, and the silence answered him with the kind of finality that the human body understands before the mind is ready to. He found the note. He found the ring. He found the signed papers. He found the baby shoes and did not understand them immediately, and then he understood them all at once, and he sat down on the kitchen floor. Kang Tae Shin, billionaire, CEO, the man who never sat on floors, and he made a sound he had never made before in his life. He sent investigators. He called her family in Chicago and received cold, careful answers that told him they knew where she was, were not going to tell him. He reached out to every mutual contact and was met with silence or pity, which was almost worse. He hired a private firm specializing in missing persons, then another, then a third. For 2 years, he followed leads that dissolved. He found traces, a design project in London that matched her style, a name on a hotel registry in Toronto. But she was always already somewhere else. She had learned, apparently, how to move through the world without leaving a door unlocked. During this time, the truth arrived in pieces. An assistant at Tai Sung, who had always been uncomfortable with Seo Rin's access to the building, came forward with logs, communications between Seo Rin and Chairman Kang going back 4 years. Then a woman who had worked at the gallery where Elena and Seo Rin met confirmed that the meeting had not been accidental. Seo Rin had been tracking Elena's schedule for a month before they spoke. Then the anonymous messages were traced, after expensive forensic effort, to a number registered under a shell company with ties to a firm Seo Rin's family owned. All of it had been a performance. Every brunch, every late-night phone call, every "I'm so glad you're here." A performance running for 3 years, with Elena Williams as its unwilling and entirely innocent audience. Tae Shin sat across from his father in the chairman's office and placed the documents on the desk without speaking. His father looked at them for a long moment and then said, in the same measured voice he used for boardroom negotiations, "I did what I believed was right for this family." Tae Shin stood up. "You destroyed my family," he said, "and I will never forgive you for it." He didn't. He severed the formal ties carefully, legally, cleanly, restructured the board so that Chairman Kang's influence was confined to his title alone. He cut Seo Rin off with such completeness that within a year she had relocated to Singapore, her name becoming something no one mentioned in his presence unless they wanted the meeting to end immediately. He moved through the next 3 years as a man who has achieved everything and finds the achievement hollow. Tai Sung Group continued to grow. His name continued to mean something. He went to events and gave speeches and closed deals and came home to a penthouse that he had never redecorated because he did not know how to make it feel different without erasing the last traces of someone who was already gone. He never stopped searching, and he never found her. And then, in a ballroom in Dubai, on a Tuesday in October, she walked onto a stage, and the host said her name, and the audience applauded, and Tae Shin learned that Elena Williams had not disappeared. She had simply become someone he hadn't known she could be. After the conference ended, he waited. He was not a man who waited for things. He sent intermediaries. He controlled the timing of encounters. He operated with the kind of orchestrated confidence that had taken 30 years to build. But tonight he simply stood near the exit of the hall, hands in his pockets, and waited, because there was no strategy left in him, and also because he was afraid. He could not remember the last time he had been genuinely afraid of a person. He was afraid of Elena. She emerged 20 minutes later, the boy's hand in hers, talking to a woman who appeared to be her creative director. She saw him from 15 feet away and did not stop walking, but he watched something move through her expression. Not surprise. She had probably already heard he was here. But something complicated, something that cost her something to keep neutral. She stopped in front of him. Tae Shin. "Elena." His voice came out quieter than he intended. "You were extraordinary up there. You've always been." He stopped. "I don't know where to start." "Then don't," she said, and it wasn't cruel. It was honest. The boy looked up at him with the frank, unfiltered curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to pretend. "Mom, who is he?" Elena looked down at her son. "Someone from my past, baby." The boy accepted this with the pragmatism of someone whose mother had always given him straight answers, and turned to inspect a flower arrangement nearby. Tae-shin looked at the child's profile and felt the impact of it move through him like a slow, deep wave. "His name is Ethan," Elena said quietly, watching Tae-shin's face. "Ethan Williams. He's mine." It wasn't a question. "He's mine," she said. "He has been every day for the last 5 years. But yes, biologically," she kept her voice even. There was no malice in it. That was somehow the hardest part. She wasn't punishing him. She was just stating the geography of a life he had not been part of. "Elena, I need you to know what happened that night. What really happened. I know what happened. No, not what you think you saw. Seo-rin. I know about Seo-rin." She shifted her evening bag from one hand to the other. "An investigative journalist contacted me 18 months ago. She was doing a piece on psychological manipulation in elite Korean social circles. She had most of the story already. I confirmed a few details." She looked at him steadily. "I know about your father. I know about the messages. I know she wasn't drunk when she kissed you. I know you were." A brief pause. "I know most of it wasn't your fault. The night itself." "Then why? Because most of it wasn't your fault is not the same as none of it was." Her voice was still calm, but it had weight now. "You drifted, Tae-shin. You withdrew. You stopped asking me how I was doing. You stopped noticing that I was drowning. Seo-rin could only use the gaps she found, and the gaps were yours to close." She glanced toward Ethan. "I'm not angry anymore. I was for a long time. But I'm not now." He asked if he could see Ethan. She said she would think about it. He asked for her number. She gave him her assistance. She allowed it, eventually. For Ethan's sake, she said exactly that, and he appreciated the honesty and understood that it was not an opening for him, only for his son. Ethan was not interested in warming up on anyone else's schedule. He was a bright, observant, self-possessed child who had grown up in the full attention of a mother who worked hard and loved harder, and he had no particular space in his life for a tall Korean man who showed up with gifts and awkward smiles and seemed to want something Ethan hadn't offered. Tae-shin came to his school once to eat lunch with him, and Ethan spent most of the meal informing him in significant detail about a documentary he'd seen about ocean currents. Tae-shin listened to every word and felt the particular joy and heartbreak of realizing his son was extraordinary. He showed up for Ethan's 5th birthday. The party was in London, where Elena had based Elena Global Design's European headquarters, and brought a present Ethan's assistant had helped him select. Ethan thanked him politely and set it aside and went back to his friends. After cake, when most of the guests were distracted, Tae-shin found himself sitting beside Ethan on the steps outside the garden. "I want to tell you something," Tae-shin said. Ethan looked at him. "Okay." "I'm your father." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." Tae-shin blinked. "Your mom told you?" "She said I have a father in Korea. She said he didn't know about me when I was born. And then when I was little, she needed time to figure things out." Ethan pulled at a thread on his shoe. "She said he was trying now." He said this without accusation, just reporting. "I am trying," Tae-shin said. "I want to be someone you can trust. I want to be your dad." Ethan thought about this seriously, the way he considered everything. "Mom says fathers protect their families," he finally said. The sentence landed so cleanly and so completely that Tae-shin had nothing to put after it. He sat with it. He nodded once. "She's right," he said. Ethan stood up and went back inside. Tae-shin stayed on the steps a while longer. It was 4 months after Dubai when Tae-shin came to Elena's London office. Not her assistant's office, not a neutral location, but her office, because he had asked, and she had agreed, and she had poured them both tea and sat across from him at her desk, the way she might sit across from a client she respected, but did not need to impress. He had prepared what he wanted to say, but it all dissolved the moment he looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for what was done to us, though I am, but for who I was inside it. I should have protected you. I should have seen what was happening. I should have noticed that you were lonely, and that our home was getting colder, and I should have stopped waiting for you to tell me what was wrong, and just looked." His voice broke slightly on the last word, and he didn't try to salvage it. "I let myself be used as a weapon against the person I loved most, and even if every hand that aimed me wasn't mine, I was still the wound." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said quietly. "Can we start over?" She set her tea down. She looked out the window, where London was doing what London does, gray and moving and indifferent. And then she looked back at him, and what was in her face was something he recognized after a moment, as peace. Not the peace that comes from getting what you want, but the peace that comes from being finished needing it. "I forgave you a long time ago, Taishin, long before Dubai. I had to, for Ethan, but also for myself. Carrying that much anger is too expensive." She folded her hands on the desk. "But forgiveness isn't the same as returning. I need you to hear that." "I hear it. Co. Rin betrayed me because she wanted what I had. That's almost understandable. Terrible, but understandable. Wanting is human." She paused. "You betrayed me, because even in the smallest, quietest ways, you chose not to notice. Co. Rin had to construct an elaborate scheme because the truth is, a happy marriage has very few gaps. Ours had gaps, Taishin, and I couldn't fill them alone." He did not argue. There was nothing to argue. "I know. You can be Ethan's father. I want that for him. He deserves to know where he comes from." She met his eyes. "But what we were, I've built something else now. Something that's mine, that I made from nothing in a city that didn't owe me anything. I am not the woman who needed Korea to feel like home because of who she married. I'm the woman who made the world feel like home because of who she became." She said it without pride, just fact. "I need you to respect that." "I do," he said. "I think I always knew what you were capable of. I just never imagined it happening without me." She smiled at that, small and real and a little sad. "That was always your mistake." The headquarters of Elena Global Designs opened on a Thursday in February, 6 months later. The building was in Canary Wharf, all glass and clean angles, and a lobby that Elena had designed herself, full of natural light and African textile art, and the kind of deliberate beauty that made people stop walking and just breathe. The ceremony was modest, by Billionaire adjacent standards, invited guests, champagne, a ribbon. But the atmosphere was electric. A black woman from Chicago, who had arrived in a foreign city with her heart in her hands, and left with nothing but herself, had turned 5 years of starting over into something people flew in from 4 continents to see. Ethan was there in a small blue suit, holding the ribbon scissors with great seriousness. When Elena leaned down to help him cut it, he held it himself, "Thank you very much," and made the cut with the decisiveness of someone who expected to be doing more ribbon cuttings in the future. The crowd laughed and applauded. On the far edge of the gathering, Tai Shin stood with his hands clasped in front of him. He had not been invited. He had heard about it, and he had come anyway, and stationed himself where he could see without intruding. He wore no badge, and accepted no program, and spoke to no one. He simply watched. He watched Ethan carry his scissors around like a trophy. He watched Elena move through her guests with the ease of someone who has finally arrived somewhere she chose. He watched a woman journalist photograph her against the lobby wall and Elena laugh at something the photographer said, and toss her head back and be entirely, completely present. She looked up eventually. She always had good instincts. Across the gathered crowd and the champagne flutes and the February light pouring through all that glass, their eyes met. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she gave him a smile, unhurried, unguarded, and entirely peaceful. It was not the smile of a woman who had won something over him. It was the smile of a woman who no longer needed anything from him at all, and had decided that this was a kindness she could afford to extend anyway. He nodded back. He reached up and adjusted his jacket, and then he turned and walked out into the London afternoon, the city noise folding around him, and let her have the day that was hers. On Valentine's Day, Kang Tae-shin had lost more than his wife. He had lost the family that had once called him home. He had lost the woman who had crossed an ocean for him and learned his grandmother's recipes